Good morning and welcome to the fall ethics session, Doing the Right Thing. My name is Liam Bramer and we will get started. We are offering ASHA CEUs for this activity, and my only financial disclosure is I'm an employee of the Department of Education. Today, we hope you'll be able to locate and describe ASHA's Code of Ethics and WVDE Employee Code of Conduct. You'll be able to apply principles of ethics to working in West Virginia schools, and we'll address some of the common ethical dilemmas identified by colleagues using the 5-step ethical decision-making model. That's the same model we've used in all of our other ethical trainings, so you're familiar with it. We had 7 people who turned in ethical situations for us this time. And a couple of them, I mean, we really try to go through and decide which ones can apply to the most people. And the ones that we selected, I think, probably will. There were a couple that were turned in that just said Medicaid and TCM. That's all it said. So, I'm really not sure what you're wanting to discuss about that specifically. So the next time we do that, please be more specific and we'll be happy to add it. And if we need to discuss anything about Medicaid and TCM before that, please feel free to contact me and we can have a conference with our Medicaid specialist, Kelly Johnson Markham. Just a reminder about the ASHA Code of Ethics. With the principle of ethics, individuals with evidence that Code of Ethics have been violated have the responsibility to work collaboratively to solve the situation where possible, or to inform the Board of Ethics. And remember that not doing anything is indeed a decision. That we also have code of conduct policies in the Department of Ed. And with this one, the most important point is that all school employees should be intrinsically motivated by the importance of the job they do to do what's appropriate for students and for their profession. So that's just a quick reminder. And just remember that any code of conduct violation that negatively impacts students, that effectively address, we have to make sure that we address those. So, and address them to the point that it deters for future incidents and affirms respect for individuals. And here are a couple of more pieces that we just wanted to go over quickly. And I know this might sound a little unnecessary, but actually when I start doing these ethics PowerPoints and doing putting them together, I realize how much I think I know and how much I've either forgotten or I have applied things that really aren't there in my thinking. So I just want to make sure we touch on these two. So employees should contribute, cooperate, and participate in creating a positive environment. Have to immediately intervene if any code of conduct violation is witnessed or has a negative impact on students. And we have to do it in a way to preserve the person's confidentiality. And we have to comply with federal West Virginia laws, policies, regulations, and procedures. And I think for the situation we're in right now with our new policy 2419 and the regulations and the policies and procedures that have been changed and updated because of that, I think just remembering this is really important. That if you're an employee of the Department of Ed, that you have to, and that filters down to your counties because they have code of conduct policies as well. So just remember, we have to adhere to those regulations and laws. So as we've done in the past, we're going to discuss an ethical dilemma, have an initial vote on solving the dilemma, and we're going to determine whether it's legal, ethical, or moral. And then we're going to discuss possible solutions. And that, I think, favorite part because you guys always come up with some really good solutions. So feel free during any of this time that we're sharing ideas to unmute or raise your hand. And Libby's monitoring the chat for me so she can tell me somebody has something to say. And we'll make sure we have your input because it's all very important. You know, it's like we always say, a lot of heads are definitely better than one or two. And you guys bring a wealth of experience to these situations as well. And honestly, in a lot of cases, you may have faced some of these situations or maybe facing them right now. And so hopefully we can come up with some good solutions. So these are the 5 steps to the ethical decision-making process that was created by Lissa Power deForr and deFurr. I never say that right. And the first one is gather data to understand what happened, because you want to make sure that you have all the information necessary to determine what, if there's really an issue at all, and if there is, which way to go in handling it. We have to identify if it's a moral, ethical, and or legal dilemma. We have to consult resources. And with consulting resources, we're going to be looking for policies and procedures, guidance documents, technical assistance available at the state or through ASHA, and also reaching out to knowledgeable or thoughtful individuals. I know I have a team of people that I reach out to when I have questions. And I'm sure everybody has that as well. And the reason those people have ended up being on your team is because you respect them, you understand that they know, the situation, the topic that you're discussing, and you feel like they are very competent in that area. And also, you've seen them in the past make really good decisions. And so, that's usually the type of person you reach out to. Then we're going to brainstorm possible ideas, and all ideas should be considered no matter how actually silly they might sound, because um, you never can tell. Just one little thought that may sound silly at first can maybe be adapted and grow into something that's a really good, plausible solution. And then step 5 is to just select which one you're going to try. And you can definitely select more than one. Um, it should revolve around the current situation and prevent future similar situations. So step 1, when we're gathering the data, we can't assume we have all the information. And that's definitely apparent in the ethical dilemmas that are turned into us for these meetings. A lot of times people include a lot of information, but sometimes it's more personal input than it is factual. And I understand that, if it's a situation that's bothering you, then that's, your the personal impact is what you were mostly thinking about. But for us to talk about and determine, some possible options for you, or if you're in this situation again, just remember you need to have all that information first before you start making decisions and maybe going off in the wrong direction, or you haven't found the a better direction to go because you don't have all the information. Watch for your personal disposition or bias. And honestly, I think that's going to be a big one in at least maybe one or two of these. And it's only human for that personal disposition or bias to have an effect on us. But when we need to separate ourselves from that when we're trying to really break the situation down and determine how to move forward. And just really think sometimes that maybe it's not such an ethical dilemma after all. It could just be because it rubs you the wrong way, or it gives you, it's not how you think things should be, so that colors your decision. You have to look for all perspectives, not just your own. And without all the information, you can misunderstand the situation. And I've honestly had a couple of times that therapists across the state have called me because they have what they think is a severe ethical situation. And I respect the fact that they want to handle those situations appropriately. And what we've done is we've actually gone through this process, and as I've asked questions and we've gathered more information, we've been able to see, a lot of these really aren't ethical situations after all. So Just making sure you have all the data is very, very important. And this one is one to really think about. If it's a moral issue, it's because it's bothering you. Um, Often it's based on your individual personal moral code or your personal stance on certain situations. If it's an ethical issue, you're going to be able to see if there's something um, to answer it as far as ASHA's Code of Ethics, resources on Code of Ethics, state policy, Board of Examiners information, and guidance document type situations so that you're really able to tell what's pieces we need to do. And then if it's a legal situation, you're going to refer to IDEA. You're going to look at state guidance. You're going to look at Medicaid regulations if it's a Medicaid issue and the BMS manual. A lot of times when we get questions about Medicaid, people have not looked at the Medicaid manual and haven't consulted that first. And honestly, that's your first best step. uh, to look at that section on speech language services and determine what needs to be done there. Examine state licensure or other credentialing requirements and review confidentiality requirements like HIPAA and FERPA. And then step 3 is to consult resources. This is where you reach out to your friends or people who are in situations that can, answer questions for you, like your principal or your special ed director. Consult with organization representatives, seek wise advice. Don't assume that you can accurately interpret the policies, laws, and regulations. And it's helpful if you have your own personal advisory board. And then the next step is brainstorming solutions. And like I said, this is my favorite step as I'm doing these webinars because you guys come up with amazing solutions. And don't throw something out just because you think it's crazy. Um, Honestly, sometimes those crazy um, ideas can really turn out to be the very best. And then select one or more options. So you're going to pick the one that's most likely to succeed. It resolves the current problem and prevents future issues. Hopefully all parties agree on the solution and it's consider any unintended consequences or negative repercussions. I think I've mentioned before that working with the director of the Office of Certification here, as we've tried to put changes into policy 5202, for instance, to make sure that it's more appropriate for SLPs to be able to achieve certification, because a lot of the teacher guidelines don't apply to us. And the big thing that he always points out, and the big thing that I try to really stop and think about now is unintended consequences. If you change one thing, it can have negative repercussions and unintended consequences. So that's just one thing to always kind of keep in the back of your mind. So this is dilemma 1, and I'm sure that this has happened to other people. I know it's happened to me when I was working in the schools. And the dilemma is that the therapy room that's shared between SLP, OT, and PT is in between classrooms. So classes are walking through during the therapy sessions and can see who's in therapy. I always thought you had to be in a setting where other students couldn't see. Like, how can you even have a speech room? You can't even have speech room on the outside of the door. And that is a directive, or not a directive, but I guess it kind of is a directive that we've given, because having speech room on that door does identify anybody who's in that room as receiving speech therapy. So this is the dilemma, and we're going to go through the 5-step process to figure out exactly what we think should happen in this situation. And it may not be exact either, because remember, step 5, we can have more than one solution for sure. So gathering the information. And with this step, we have you guys turn these in as anonymous, so I can't reach out to anyone and try to get more information before the webinar. But as you guys are thinking about this situation and we're trying to do our very first step of gathering information, be thinking about what information you think you might need to have too, um, that we don't have right now. And the first thing is that SLP has to share office with OT and PT in a room that's situated between classrooms. We do know that. We don't know what their schedule is. We don't know if they share the room all at the same time. We don't know if they've worked it out so that, the SLP has therapy 2 days a week, OT, PT, alternate. We don't know anything about the scheduling of the students. Other students walk through the therapy room during sessions and can see other students. We don't know if there are no other buildings available no other rooms available in the building. Um, and honestly, that's one of the ways that I handled one of my situations was I found a janitor's closet and asked if I could clean it out and use it. And, so we don't know any of that information with this dilemma that we received. We don't know if there are other options. We can't assume that we have all the facts with this brief description. But is there anything that designates the room as therapy room, or are students just seeing other students in there? Do they have any idea what's going on in that room because it's designated a therapy room? It would be just like potentially walking through a Title I classroom or something and just seeing students working with an adult. So we don't know that information. These are just some suggestions of some other info to gather. To consult with the lead therapist or special ed director. Um, Whenever you do have an issue that you think needs to be handled, it's just like we recommend to parents when we get parent complaints. The best thing to do is I don't like the word chain of command, but the best thing to do is start with the person that you're having issues with, and then, kind of go up from there. Um, and a lot of times, like parents haven't talked to the therapist or the special ed director, they just go straight to the State Department. And so, make sure that you've talked to your building principal first, then your lead therapist, then the special ed director. And, if you can't get help, um, then the State Department would be the next logical step. But just to make sure that you're trying to deal with the situation head on and openly and professionally, that's just a good suggestion. Consult IDEA confidentiality, and we have a checklist, a link for a checklist for that. Consult the West Virginia Department of Education Policy 6200. That's the planning for school facilities policy. Consult your personal advisory board, because if you have personal advisors who are SLPs, maybe they've run into this situation before. And ASH has recommended recommendations for therapy rooms in schools is another thing that you can consult to gather. There is information in policy, put WVDE, I apologize for that, policy 6200. And this is called the school planning of facilities policy. The thing about this policy is it doesn't always assist when you have an old building. Um, you know, Builders and contractors and school systems are supposed to refer to this policy as they create new buildings and that kind of thing. But we all know that you can't sometimes restructure an old building to make the requirements that are listed here. Professional support staff providing full-time basis are required to have a full-time room assignment, and we'll look at that just in just a second. But it says that related services or special education services may be provided by an itinerant or school-based professional support staff and other related specialists. Adequate space must be available for those itinerants. It doesn't say how much, it just says adequate space. For those full-time support staff, this is what the policy says. So when they create those new buildings. This is what they're supposed to try to go for. And honestly, when they did consolidation in our county, my school was involved. I made sure to get myself on the planning committee to be sure that they included um, room for itinerants, because I knew we were going to have a primary center, and we were going to have, itinerants coming in providing services. So if you can get yourself on committees like that, if you're in that situation, that's always helpful. ASHA has a description of the room that they think that a therapist should provide therapy in. And, it's nice to have ASHA's perspective, but just remember that ASHA provides guidance and develops best practice recommendations, but that does not mean that what ASHA says is law or has to be implemented. But sometimes it makes an impact on your principal or your special ed director if they hear, that ASHA does have recommendations for some of these things. So it mentions confidentiality and sensitivity, and it should only be used by one professional at a time. Um, but we all know that there, in some cases, I know some friends right now who share therapy rooms. They have a big classroom, they divide it in half. And so, these are suggested best practice, ultimate, if everything's, all the stars align, this is what should happen. So now we're going to decide if this is a ethical, moral, or legal issue. And this is where you can go to your idea boards. And if you remember, you just um, click on the sticky note here, and it will come up, and you just type in, you just hit the thumbs up button, and that shows a vote for you. So it's going to be either a moral, ethical, or legal issue. If you go ahead and do that, I see some votes coming in now. Mm. Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds here. I appreciate you guys voting. This makes it's really helpful for me to see how everybody views things, and I think it's helpful for you guys too. So it looks like we have the majority. Oh my goodness. I think it's actually not the majority. It is the majority now. Um, ethical, believe it's an ethical issue. And right close behind is the legal issue. And then no one said that they thought this was a moral issue. So thank you for those of you who voted. It's a neck and neck tie with ethical and legal. So let's see what we can find here. Actually, I think we're going to hopefully show you that it's more of a, um, we're just going to have to decide what kind of issue it is, because it's kind of split the same way. The big thing that I think you need to remember is that it is that confidentiality whenever it's mentioned. This is where that gathering the information comes in handy, because if you understand confidentiality requirements applicable to IDEA early ed programs, this is what it says. But it all mentions personally identifying information, and it mentions the name of the child. So that's the reason we said not to have anything that says, any designation on a door that says speech room or speech therapy. And even your reward charts, if you have the student's full name up there, then it designates that that student receives speech therapy. So personally identifying information we have to be careful of, but walking through a classroom and just seeing a student sitting with an adult, that doesn't really violate that policy. Um, and as far as FERPA is concerned, it relates directly to records, directly. And so does IDEA confidentiality. So there's a checklist. This is as a link, but everything mentions the personal identifying information or the information as far as records, IEPs, that kind of thing, but not just seeing a person's face. So even though it's uncomfortable for us, um, and there's a reason for that, um, we don't want to break confidentiality. It's instilled in us not to break in confidentiality. But I just want you to see again that with ASHA, it mentions the code of ethics, student client information, record keeping, all has to be confidential. Personally identifying information here again, and personally identifying information. So, that shows the importance of trying to gather all the information before you move forward, or before you um, accuse someone of putting you in a situation where you're breaching ethics. Um, I've heard that several times as far as the new policy and other situations, and believe me when I say I take the ethical considerations extremely seriously. I have my licensure and my Cs, and I would never put anyone in a situation where that would impact theirs. So make sure that before you make um, a judgment or an accusation, that you have researched everything thoroughly and can back up what you're saying. So now, um, I want to spend a little bit of time doing some brainstorming for solutions, because you guys are going to have, um, some people have already gone in and put some things in where we sent out the links ahead of time. So thank you for doing that. It looks like so far they say look for another room, don't label the door speech therapy, possibly use room dividers. In the room dividers, I mean, we have done that in the past in some of those situations I've been in, so that as students are walking through that classroom or that room that's there, if you've got file cabinets or, storage cabinets that you can put in that walkway to kind of block the view, sometimes that's very helpful. Um, Probably doesn't have a leg to stand on, but to make myself feel better, I would document a confidentiality session with the roommates. Okay. Um, So any other solutions, you can just click on the plus sign, and that pops up a suggestion for you. Work with other professionals to coordinate schedule to avoid overlap. Those are all good suggestions. We've got some more votes to look for another room. Don't label the door. Possibly use room dividers. Um, so I'm hoping that some of these suggestions, I kind of feel like that maybe there isn't another room available. That's the reason you're you have that room in the first place, but you never know. And looking for it is just another way to gather all the information to be able to say there isn't another room available. Excuse me. Make sure students' back is facing outwards. That's a great one. Um, so that they can't see their faces. I think not labeling the room is huge, and I think that's a good place to start. And being careful about having their names posted anywhere, that's helpful too. But I'm hoping that this makes you feel a little bit better, just knowing that even though it's disruptive, I'm sure, and that it's not the ideal situation by any means, that as far as breaking confidentiality laws or regulations, that's really not an issue. Oh goodness. Okay, sorry about that. So we have a lot of votes here. Thank you guys for participating with us. This is, like I said, this is my favorite part, and you guys always come up with good things. Okay.
You had one question here. It says, who can speech share a room with using dividers?
I think it just, I mean, I know that there have been times there have been counselors. Counselors, I would be hesitant with just because of the information that they might be hearing. But other SLPs, I know that there have been situations with reading interventionists. I don't think there's any set rule about that. It's just protecting the students' um, personally identifying information and their records is the most important thing, no matter who you're sharing the room with. I definitely wouldn't share it with a music class or, something like that that's going to be very disruptive. But OTPT, I think that could be doable. All right. So step 5 is to select one or more options, and we're not going to go through and talk about which one to select, but I think you have um, some really good places to start. And I see Melanie has a question about, can special ed classes share another space with someone who's not special ed? Um, I don't think there's any rule about that either, just because you can't put all the special ed people together. They're supposed to be, blended in with a non-disabled so that it's not just all a big, center of special ed. So I think that should be okay. Wouldn't you have to find another space to do your evaluations for them to be during the information gathering? That's a very good point. And I think that you definitely would. You'd have to not have the disruption and that kind of thing. So that's another piece of information that you could share with the principal that would really provide you with some good support. Okay, dilemma 2. And if we don't get to dilemma 3, we'll make sure we get that information out somehow. I know people are disappointed, and I never know when we first start going through how much discussion we're going to have. So I always try to plan for 3. But this one I think is very important. Students are placing left and right in special education, and I'm sure that's happening in a lot more places than just where this person's located. The county is understaffed, which unfortunately most are right now, and there are so many that keep coming in who qualify. I'm discouraged from placing so many, especially preschoolers, but they really need and qualify for therapy. What can I do to help the students but also cover myself? Ethically, I cannot and will not stop recommending therapy for students that qualify for and need it. But I also am discouraged by the constant chattering of overqualification that obviously is directed towards me. So I picked this one. I think you can see why, because I'm sure this is happening in a lot of places right now. So we're going to take this one through the ethical decision-making model and see what we can find. So with this one, there's still some information that I think needs to be gathered. And if you guys have anything, I've got my chat so I can see it now. If you guys have any other information you think we should gather, go ahead and put that in the chat. But what deficits do the students exhibit? I think that's one of the things that's important, because I think what's happening when they mentioned especially preschoolers, I think what's happening in a lot of districts right now, and this is pretty global, because we've been on calls with, oh my goodness, it's less than 10, but at least, between 5 and 10 districts who are in that situation where all the preschool programs are already full. And so figuring out what deficits they have and whether they're related perhaps to COVID and the fact that the children haven't been, they can get language stimulation in natural settings. They maybe haven't been with other students or other, family members or, been in structured groups. And some of them are appearing to be delayed. Um, so the next question, and I know you guys are going to get sick of me saying this, but as I've traveled around the state recently and done trainings, I always ask, what are the 3 prongs of eligibility? And everyone looks at me and pretty much says, if they don't have the sound by the time they should, according to developmental norms. And that is not, you know, it's something to consider when trying to diagnose whether there's a disorder, but it's not an eligibility criteria. So thinking about the three prongs of eligibility, you know, that they have a disorder, that it negatively impacts academics. In the case of these preschoolers, it's social communicative functioning that that it can affect, and they need specially designed instruction. And honestly, I think that one, in some of these cases, is the one that really is causing the issue because um, some of these kids, if they have not been exposed, may not particularly need, and we don't know because we don't have any testing information here, anything like that. But if they have just not been exposed and haven't had experience yet, and I think that is happening because what we've heard from those conversations that we've had with districts is they'll get IEPs and 2 months later they're better. So if 2 months later they're better after getting some, you know, some support and some stimulation, then that's really wasn't a disability after all. It was a delay. And so, excuse me, they may not need the skill set, the specific skill set of the SLP to make those corrections. It could be that, you know, with some support and collaboration with the classroom teacher, you know, all the students could benefit from some suggestions from the SLP. Um, we just don't know all that, but, you know, making sure that you adhere to the three prongs of eligibility is always going to be your protection for this. Have you proven the educational impact? And that's academic, social, communicative, or vocational. And with those preschoolers, like I said, it's going to be that social communicative. But even if you're, you know, placing other students in therapy that are other grade levels, just remember they have to have that academic impact. And in the past, you know, everybody's just kind of checked off, yep, they've got one. We know they're going to have one because they can't say some of their sounds, for instance. That doesn't mean they necessarily do. So now, with the language assessment summary and the speech production assessment summaries, you're going to have to show the academic impact. Um, and so we're going to have to do a little research to get that, but it's also going to give you your targets for therapy as opposed to just looking at things that were missed on test items. Has steps been considered for any of the children? Um, we've been talking, just kind of throwing some ideas around because, like I said, this is a statewide issue right now. It's not just a certain county. And because of that, you know, I think there might be information um, that we can figure out a way to do some steps programs before identifying students with IEPs. And so we're just kind of, you know, throwing around some ideas with that because part of our job is prevention. And instead of going straight with preschoolers too, um, IEPs, there's a potential that you could go to steps, even if they're drop-ins. You could have, you know, your drop-ins come at the same time, maybe, and do some language stimulation or speech stimulation that way. For some of your preschoolers who are going to be placed in classrooms, you can do stimulation within that classroom for those kids who maybe have some language deficits or even social deficits that you could maybe work on with the whole group and model for the classroom staff. So this is all just kind of information you need to think about. And then it says what other information needs to be gathered. We definitely need to look at policy 2419. And we also need to look at personal biases. And so I'm going to answer these questions in the chat first, and then I want to go back to the personal biases. What about if you're getting interventions like birth to three, but all interventions have been virtual? You know, that's an individual question based on an individual student. And the thing of it is I get calls, we get parent complaint calls, of course, and several of the ones I've gotten actually since COVID have been from preschool parents who are complaining about virtual um, therapy, you know, not meeting the needs of their child. So birth to three has been in the same situation we've been as far as being able to have access to kids. So if they've had interventions and they've all been virtual, that might be something that you want to say, we want to monitor this child for a little bit. If they're 3 years old, you could include them in, like a steps group or a drop in for steps, but maybe not identify them with an IEP. If they're a preschooler, that's another age, or they're already in a preschool program and you're picking them up that way, that might be a really good time to try some dynamic assessment, to try some steps with them, see what they can do, send that information home to parents. I know that people always say my parents won't help. That's always the first thing we hear. But honestly, in a lot of cases, parents are more than willing to help. They just don't know what to do. So, you know, that's another thing that we need to consider. Sarah says, how long can a student be in STEPS or RTI? There's no limit with this. It's if the student's making progress, then you can continue. If they're not, then and they're not going to qualify for an IEP, then you can you know, tell the parent they have the option of outside therapy. And just remember too, just because a student doesn't correct based on steps doesn't mean they automatically have a free ride to an IEP. The reason you've put them in steps is because there's no educational impact. If there's a student who has an educational impact, you already know they do, then that student needs to be referred and given an IEP right away. If they meet all the other eligibility criteria. So, don't get that confused. Um, and I see Joe is saying that there's no time for steps, and I get that. I understand it. I told special ed directors at the special ed directors conference that with the comprehensive language evaluations you're being expected to do, and that with the other, things that you're going to be expected to do with steps, if they have to give you the time to be able to do that. If you're scheduled back to back, that's not going to happen. In the guidance document, um, we talk about the 3-to-1 model and other service delivery models 4-to-1. Um, those webinars are going to be sent to directors because some directors have just automatically had a nope, we're not doing that attitude about it in the past because people have abused the privilege. There have been people who I heard in one county that several of the service providers would fix each other's hair on Friday. They would cut each other's hair and style it at school. People running errands or getting their nails done, that kind of thing. So that gives administrators and special ed directors a bad taste in their mouth. But so if you determine that you're going to be able to use one of those models, please follow it appropriately. Make sure you have that week scheduled. That you don't not just showing them a blank calendar for that compliance week or that week that you do your indirect services. And we also know that with steps, they don't count on your caseload. That's been mentioned to special ed directors too. It'll be mentioned again. It's in the guidance document that they need to count. The people don't have time in their schedules to do it if they don't. But you can see that they don't have as much paperwork. They don't have to be seen as often. The responsibilities aren't there as much as they are for students on your caseload. So what we typically recommend is that every 3 to 5 step students counts as one student on your caseload. And okay, so I see a bunch of questions here about steps, and what I'm going to do so we can get through the rest of this one is we'll just go ahead and write up like a Q&A document about steps and get that sent out to all the participants. But I do see one here about I have difficulty at times with special ed students receiving straight A's on the report card, but then I'm saying there's an educational impact. Well, you're exactly right. That is an issue because if they don't have an educational impact, those students should not have an IEP. They don't meet the 3 prongs of eligibility. I know in the past, everybody's been pretty lenient about that. I used to go through myself 7 years ago and, check off on the eligibility forms. Yes, yes, yes. They made all three, not even reading them. Just thinking I know them, and I did, but I didn't apply them. It was just like a formality that you had to go through. Well, that's not the case. That's not what the law says. The law says they have to meet it. And we always talk about when we do our trainings about the fact that if you identify a student with a disability, which is what you're doing when you give them an IEP, um, then you're violating their civil rights. If you identify them when they don't have one, you're violating their civil rights. Now, we were all taught in college to identify disorders and to treat disorders, and we're good at it. That's what we do. That does not mean that we should do that if it's not that we should apply that approach to everything that we do. What we have to do is take what we learned and what we were taught and apply the laws and regulations that are in the program in which we work, and then provide services based on that. So, telling, and I used to sit there and do it myself, the parent and the teacher would be saying, I don't see the problem. But I would be saying, but they have a frontal lisp. We have to correct that. That's a disorder. No, that's not how services work in the school system. So this is one of the things that I think where it's really important for you to separate what you think is your personal bias about this issue. I know I have a lot of friends. I've been in the field for this is my 41st year. I have a lot of friends who are SLPs, and I appreciate the fact that they um, are honest with me and tell me their opinions. And I've had some of them, really question hard about saying that they have to meet the eligibility guidelines. But you know what? That's what it says. So it is going to take you out of your comfort zone. It's going to take you away from what you've been doing. And if you've been automatically placing students because they have um, the the disorder without having that disability, then that's something you definitely need to look at and change with your practice. So now we're going to vote quickly on whether or not this is a legal, ethical, or moral issue. I'm seeing a lot of questions pop up in the chat. So while you're voting, I am going to um, answer a couple of them. One of them was um, should students be placed in steps if their speech sound errors are not impacting education? And actually, yes, they can. That's one of the recommendations we make for the people who have such significant concerns about not working on a student's R, for instance, or a frontal lisp, because they um, don't qualify. If they did have an educational impact, you could give them an IEP. So the steps is a good option for that. And like I said, you can do it in groups. You can do it every other week. You can just send information home. That's the beauty about the steps program. And um, that's the reason that it's important. That's the reason that steps is an important option. Okay, so looking at the votes here, it looks like we have 40 that say it's an ethical situation, um, placing students in therapy, and then 15 say it's a legal situation. So we're going to go ahead because I want to finish on time. And these, of course, are the things that you would normally do as far as your 5-step process. Consult resources. That's where we're going to consult some organizations. And everyone, the majority said it was an ethical issue. So I scoured ASHA. I scoured the principles of ethics and ASHA's code of ethics. And this is what I found out. Um, Individuals should not misrepresent research and scholarly activities, diagnostic information. And the reason that I highlighted that one is remember that the diagnostic information that you're gathering for these students to receive an IEP and to be placed in therapy are those three prongs of eligibility. So to make a determination that you're going to check that box, even though you don't have the information to support that academic impact, that is an ethical consideration that I think needs to be looked at. Another one is that individuals shall comply with local, state, and federal laws, regulations applicable to professional practice. And our professional practice is in the schools. So in the schools, we have to follow IDEA and policy 2419. That 2419 is our regulations, and IDEA is federal law. So this one I think is really important. You know, a lot of times people think that the ethical situation here is not providing services to someone who has a disorder. That's not the case. The case is that you have to follow the regulations. It's just like if you're working in a SNF or you're working in a clinical setting, and in order to continue therapy, they have to show progress. Well, you know, I don't think you guys would keep people receiving therapy in the SNF or in the clinical setting if they weren't meeting the guidelines. And it's the same thing here. Even though no one has gone around and double checked your information, your placement information, just know personally and professionally that, you know, the ethical thing to do is to follow those guidelines. And now I want to brainstorm some solutions. Um, with this one, feel free to write comments on here or comments in the chat box, because I understand, and that's the reason I chose this one. I understand some of you have really strong feelings about this, and I want you to know that your feelings are understood, because I've told you guys before, when I first heard about this, I thought, nope, I want to be retired before this happens in West Virginia. But this has honestly been happening across the country for over 10 years. And it's time we caught up and did what was ethically correct as far as what the regulations and the laws say. It's also because I know that you guys always want to do the very just best job possible. It's also best practice. And so I hope it makes you feel a little bit better to know that all the information that we changed in policy 2419 and all the information that's been updated in the speech guidance document has been thoroughly researched. We've gotten information from other states because we wanted to go places where we knew it's been happening, it's been functional, and everybody has been moving forward. So it's not stuff that we just created out of thin air. It's not something that I'm just saying, oh, I think it'd be really nice if we did this. No, it's the law, and it's everything that we're doing is based on that. So it looks like keep preferring qualifying kids that meet criteria. So the ones absolutely, if those kids meet the criteria, the three prongs of eligibility, and you have proof of that, then it is your responsibility to identify them and place them in therapy. What you need to make sure that you do, though, is look at each individual student before you place them and ask yourself the three questions. Do I have all the information I need to support it? The thing of it is, too, is with these the summary assessment sheets that we've added, they're optional forms. They're not part of your evaluation, but they're optional forms that you can use at the eligibility meeting, or at an IEP meeting if it's related to service, to show the IEP team or the eligibility committee where that student falls. We're going to be sending an email out today and one Monday. One today is going to be speech sound disorders. Monday, hopefully, will be language. And we're going to give you pieces of the document. We're going to give you a recorded webinar about how things have changed. And we're going to give you a recorded webinar about how to use these summary assessments in the sample forms. The guidance document is not going to be out exactly when the policy becomes in effect. It has to go through graphics and some vetting here. Hopefully it'll be out within 2 weeks after, but you'll get information that you need ahead of time and you will have access to the summary assessment forms. The summary assessment forms will show you, you're going to circle where the student falls for academics and all your speech probes and assessments. And then the IEP team is going to help decide whether or not that student requires therapy. If you do that, then it helps protect you from anyone who says you're over identifying. And if you follow the guidelines and you have the proof, that takes you right back to the guidelines. Policy starts November 14th. Let's see. Create interventions optionally to differentiate delay versus disability. And a lot of times with those preschoolers, if you say that you want to do a dynamic assessment or, if it's a student who receives other services, then you can say you want to do additional evaluations and do a dynamic assessment, see if they can correct and that kind of thing before you give them an IEP. If it's a drop-in, you could maybe try steps first because, they could drop in for steps just like they could for service. And then gather your data to help support, whether it's a delay or a disorder or a disability. Consider using PERC or pre-K teachers to provide parent play groups. That's a great idea, or interventions as librarians to offer preschool story times. That's a fabulous idea. And actually, one of the people I was brainstorming with somebody the other day about how to address this issue about doing steps instead of service for drop-ins. And the location where they could hold that was a question, and the library is a great idea. Have teacher work on language skills in the classroom if students don't qualify. That's absolutely right. And you can collaborate with that teacher without that student having an IEP. And once you've taught the teacher some things to do, some language, accommodations to make, she can use that with all students too. It just doesn't have to be that one. And it doesn't have to just be language. It can be artic too. Educate staff, administrators, parents on disability versus delay. Make sure administrators support you with parent teachers resist your recommendations. And that's an important point. And I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about. Parents being upset when they hear that like their a student, an older sibling might have qualified, but this younger sibling may not. You can show them the rules and policy. You can show them, that summary assessment form for whatever area, and that will help support your stance. And just remember, if you have applied your 3 prongs of eligibility all along, and that student has had an educational impact, then you're going to be on solid ground. Same thing with continuing to refer students and place them. Just make sure that you've got the information to back you up. Um, Refer to outside therapy and be careful with that one. That's exactly right. You don't refer to outside therapy, but you tell parents they have the option to do that. Um, and then for preschool, do interventions in the classroom. Great idea. When screening preschool in the fall, some may need time to adjust and rescreen in January. Absolutely. You can follow them. You can do some dynamic assessment. You can, do some observations in the classroom, maybe make some suggestions to the classroom teacher and the classroom staff, and then they can get those interventions all day long. And they don't maybe need that specially designed instruction that only you can provide. I do see a question about steps, and I'll answer that one quickly. Do steps and IEP kids still have to be seen separately? Yes, they do, because steps is considered an intervention, even though I know you guys are going to say that did I have those out of order? Um, oh no, that's what we just looked at. But some of you are going to say that you do the same thing with both kids. But, the difference between the two is those kids who have received an IEP have academic impact or educational impact. So what you're targeting with them should be what they're working on in the classroom. That's one of the reasons you're doing that that academic fact finding and information gathering, because that's what you should be using with them. With the other kids, they're just getting intervention, and you could give them all different types of support without having to be educationally related and impacted. So anyway, you had a bunch of options there that you could check. The big thing I think to remember is that I'm sorry, we're going to have to skip this one, but you can read it and think about the solutions, and we can even try to provide some support for that one. Whoops. After, okay, after when we send the Q&A document out to you. Um, so just remember, as long as you're adhering to policy and the law, then you don't have to be concerned about putting kids in therapy. If the kids that are coming um, meet those qualifications, then you should absolutely put them in therapy. The concern is, and honestly, this is a nationwide concern because speech language impaired has been designated by the Office of Special Ed Program as an eligibility category that has a history of over-identification. So where you do need to be concerned about that is if you're placing students in therapy because you feel like they need help, and they may not get it any other place. If you feel like they have that disorder that they have needs to be corrected, and that's where that personal opinion and personal comes in, um, and you don't, but they don't meet all the eligibility requirements, and you go ahead and put them in anyway, then that is an over-identification. Um, I understand that you want to help everybody. I've been told, as we've talked about educational relevance for years now, I've been told that people won't be able to get married, get jobs, that kind of thing, if we don't correct their R's. I think if you look around and see, that's not the case. And I've also been asked about the college and career readiness standards, about them saying that students have to speak clearly um, and say sounds correctly. The thing of it is think about your students who you're not able to correct the sounds. It doesn't mean that they don't meet the standards and they're not graduated on. So I think just trying to remember what the ethical considerations are for following the law. I think remembering that following the law is what we have to do, and remembering that there are outside options. The school system, I know, is the only game in town for some counties because we're so rural. But the school system is to provide support for academics. That's what our therapy is supposed to do for that, not academics especially as much as education. And that includes social communicative functioning and vocational skills, as well as academics. So I know that this may be difficult for some of you guys as we start this, start out with this, but hopefully you'll see that it's not going to be as bad as you think, and that we'll be trying to provide support along the way. We're not just going to say, okay, here you go. We've changed everything. Now you're on your own. So we'll be supporting you with that. Libby has put the link to fill out the attendance survey in here. And like I said, we'll go back through and get the questions that we didn't get answered, and send out a document to everyone who fills out the survey, so we'll know you attended the session. And Libby, is there anything else you want to say about the CEUs?
If you could go ahead and show the slide with the QR code, that would be good so that it'll be on the recording. That's good. So remember that the links are for the link that's in the chat box is for the live presentation. And if you're viewing this recording, then you would use the QR code to receive credit.
And I said I
And
thought it was November 17th. It's the 21st.
yes,
Sorry.
and I remembered incorrectly too. We've got a lot of dates going on.
We do. That's for sure.
All right.
If
I'm
you,
going to get off
it,
and go to the other show, the other presentation,
sure,
but as long as
sure.
you've got the recording on there and everybody has their verification of attendance, everybody have a good weekend. Thank you, Leanne. It was wonderful. You always do a good job.
Thanks so much. I'm going to stop the recording.